Please take care of Jonathan. Don't look for me. One day, my husband Adam, who had been married before and had a child, left this note along with the divorce papers and disappeared from Jonathan and me. That was 3 years ago. A lot has happened since then. Jonathan and I worked hard to find happiness together. And just when things were finally going well, Adam suddenly came back. Without a hint of remorse for leaving us, he said something unbelievable. I'm getting remarried, so I want Jonathan back. Huh? You think I'm just going to agree to that? Get out. After Adam left, 10-year-old Jonathan stared at the business card his dad had left behind. Tomorrow, I'll go see him. The next day, just as he said, Jonathan went to see Adam. But he came back a few hours later with a shocking revelation. This is the guy. What? I live with my husband, Adam, who's 10 years older than me, and his 6-year-old son, Jonathan. We only became a family last year. I knew from the start that Adam had been married before and was raising Jonathan. He'd told me that his previous marriage had ended due to his ex-wife's spending habits and other unavoidable issues. Seeing him set Jonathan's face as his phone's lock screen and race home every day to pick him up from daycare, I believed he was a caring and gentle man, devoted to his family. As I spent time with Adam, who was warm and calm, I came to believe that no matter what challenges we faced, we'd be able to overcome them together. I was new to both marriage and parenting, so my relationship with Jonathan, who was now technically my son, felt a bit tense at first. But Jonathan, who was friendly and outgoing, took to calling me Sophie and seemed fond of me. I'd initially felt the need to act like a mom, but I realized that building trust between us as people was enough. Even though he was only 5 at the time, Jonathan taught me that. As my nervousness eased, the emotional distance between Jonathan and me gradually shrank. Whether this was motherhood or something else, I wasn't really sure. When I bought the light blue backpack he picked out for starting elementary school, I felt a mix of happiness and a strange pang of sadness, wondering if maybe I was starting to feel like a mom. Even then, Jonathan kept calling me Sophie, but I decided that was fine. As long as we could be a family in our own way, that was enough. Adam, on his part, was as gentle and family-oriented after marriage as he had been before. At Adam's suggestion, I became a housewife. Though I no longer saw him in a work setting, seeing him come home on time every day to be with his family made me feel deeply loved. It was a peaceful and happy life. I'd had my doubts before the marriage, but with each passing day, I was genuinely glad I'd taken the leap. But then, one day, Adam suddenly disappeared. That day, I was working my part-time shift at a bakery, the job I took while Jonathan was at school. My shift was supposed to end at 2 p.m., but it ran a bit late. After picking up Jonathan from the after-school care attached to his elementary school, we headed home together. We're home. Jonathan, are you hungry? I bought some bread. Do you want to have some? Yay, I want some. Hearing Jonathan's happy voice made me smile. Would you like milk? Or there's orange juice too. I called from the kitchen to where he was in the living room. Milk, please. Oh, there's something here. Looks like a letter, he replied. A letter. Thinking it was probably just a note from his teacher, I poured milk into 2 glasses and brought them to the living room. But it seemed I was wrong. Here, it was right here. Jonathan handed me a piece of paper. I looked at it and couldn't believe what I saw. Please take care of Jonathan. Don't look for me. It sounded like something straight out of a movie or drama, like a line from someone about to disappear forever. At first, I thought he must be playing some kind of prank. After all, our marriage was fine, our family was happy, and there was no reason for him to leave. Just this morning, We had our usual goodbye at the door. But then, I noticed the filled-out divorce papers lying on the table, right where the letter had been. It no longer seemed like a joke. There was no mistaking it. This was an actual divorce application, complete with his signature. He wouldn't go this far as a joke. I didn't know why, but it became painfully clear that Adam had left us, that he truly wanted a divorce. The realization washed over me, and before I could even make sense of the situation, tears started to fall. Then, a small hand gently held my trembling one. I snapped out of my shock to see Jonathan looking up at me, worry etched on his face. If I'd been alone, I probably would have broken down. I think that's what it feels like when the happiness you thought would last forever vanishes. When someone precious to you suddenly disappears right in front of you. But, because Jonathan was there, I could keep myself from falling apart. Wiping away the tears, I squeezed Jonathan's hand back. "It's okay. You must be hungry. Let's have some bread." I set the note and the divorce papers aside. I didn't know how much 6-year-old Jonathan understood about the situation, and I couldn't bring myself to ask him. But when he smiled as usual and said, "This is yummy, I'm so happy," his presence was the only thing that kept my heart steady. After we finished eating, Jonathan worked on his homework while I did some housework. I kept busy, afraid that if I stopped, I'd start crying again. We had dinner, checked his homework, he took a shower, and by the time I had seen him off to bed, it was already 9 p.m. This was the time Adam would normally be home by. The fact that he wasn't after that letter hit me harder than ever, but with a little distance from the shock, I started to think about what I could do. Even if he'd told me not to look for him, there was no way I could just let it go. First, I tried to reach out to friends and acquaintances we shared, but most of the numbers seemed to have changed. For the few who did answer, none had any idea where Adam was, or had any updates. Then I tried calling his parents' home and managed to speak with his brother, who lived there. He didn't seem surprised, which made me think Adam's family probably already knew. But, although he was apologetic, his brother didn't have any idea where Adam had gone either. In the end, I found nothing. Where Adam had gone, and why he'd left, it was all a mystery. The next day, after seeing Jonathan off to school, I went to the police. I thought maybe they could open a missing persons case. If Adam wanted a divorce, I wouldn't necessarily refuse. Deep down, of course, I didn't want it. I wanted us to stay together as a family, just the three of us. But if he had a reason to leave, I wanted to hear it directly from him. So I couldn't just submit those signed divorce papers without understanding why. But when I asked for help finding him, they said there wasn't much they could do since he was a healthy adult who had left by choice. I'd expected as much, though it still stung. With no other options, I decided to try one last thing. I called Adam's workplace once business hours started, and that's when I heard something shocking. Adam, he left the company at the end of last week. I couldn't believe it, but no matter how many times I asked, their answer didn't change. Adam had quit his job a full week before disappearing. Of course, he never mentioned a word about it. What's more, up until yesterday morning, he'd left for work each day, acting like everything was normal. I had no idea what he was thinking. Was the Adam I thought I knew just an illusion? I was staring blankly at the divorce papers at home when I heard a voice beside me. "Sophie, are you okay?" Jonathan had returned home without me even noticing. "Oh, sorry," I spaced out. "Welcome back." Hearing my response, Jonathan looked relieved and said, "I'm home." Seeing his face brought me back to my senses. Even if Jonathan didn't understand words like divorce or disappearance yet, he surely sensed something different, especially with his dad gone overnight. The one feeling the most anxiety right now was probably Jonathan. How could I let myself be crushed by this when he needed me most? Asterix, I have to protect him. Asterix, that thought gave me strength. Thanks for worrying about me. How about spaghetti tonight, your favorite? Yay. Even though I couldn't accept the reality of Adam's disappearance or understand his reasons, I had been looking for any excuse not to face it. But now for Jonathan, I made up my mind to move forward. To apply for single-parent support, I submitted the divorce papers right away. I took the exam for a full-time position at the bakery where I'd been working part-time, and it was decided I would start as a full-time employee next year. It wouldn't make me rich, but it would be enough for me and Jonathan for now. I started putting away savings little by little, hoping to at least support him through high school, and ideally, even college. Whether Adam would come back someday or stay away forever, I didn't know. But I began carefully planning out our lives so that Jonathan and I could thrive even without him. Fortunately, I wasn't struggling to find immediate work, and I felt quite fortunate in that regard. I started to move forward and found that I could think positively about our situation. Then, one day, Jonathan disappeared. This time, with a first grader missing, the police acted immediately. I couldn't sit still and was out searching for him when early the next morning, the police contacted me to say they'd found him. Jonathan had gone on his own to a child protection facility in the next town over. Asterix, did he not want to live with me, his stepmother? Asterix, the police and staff at the facility eyed me with suspicion. They wondered if I might have abused him, and while I understood their reasoning, it was devastating. I'd only ever tried to care for him, doing my best to make a happy life for us both. Was I not needed by Adam or even by Jonathan? I didn't want to think that way, but it felt unavoidable. I was overwhelmed with sadness and frustration, but in the midst of it all, it was Jonathan himself who calmed me and explained his thoughts, clearing up the misunderstanding. He had thought that since his real dad and I were now divorced, he, as the stepchild, no longer belonged with me. He thought he was doing it for my sake, and so he'd gone to the facility. In the end, both Jonathan and I were individually questioned about our intentions, and it was confirmed that we had a positive relationship and wished to keep living together. Jonathan and I returned home together, and as the relief of him being safe sank in, I couldn't stop the tears. I thought about how much fear and loneliness he must have felt, yet he still acted so bravely. "Can I really come back home?" he asked, still looking hesitant. I hugged him tightly. "Of course you can. You can stay with me always. After all, I'm your mom." I'd often doubted myself, wondering if I was really being a good mother. But in that moment, the words came naturally. Jonathan, through his own tears, clung to me and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." That moment made me realize that, even without sharing the same blood, we were truly family. 3 years have passed since then. We have been supporting each other every step of the way. His gentle and pure heart has given me strength countless times. Over these 3 years, one significant change took place. One day, I unexpectedly met Josephine, Jonathan's biological mother. Coincidentally, Josephine had been a regular customer at the bakery where I worked, though we hadn't known much about each other's personal lives. One day, she arrived just as my shift was ending, and we ended up having coffee together. During that time, she opened up about the emotional abuse from her ex-husband that had once shattered her mental health. She appeared so vibrant and full of life now that it was hard to imagine the pain she'd endured in the past. I realized she was sharing her story to encourage me, a stepmother raising a child, by showing empathy from her own experiences. At one point during lunch, she noticed my phone's lock screen with a picture of Jonathan and me. She asked, "Is that your son? I'd love to see a closer look, if you don't mind." I handed her my phone, and she asked, "I hope this doesn't sound strange, but is his name Jonathan?" I was stunned. "Yes, that's his name." "How do you know?" It was then that I learned Josephine was Jonathan's biological mother. Honestly, I was terrified that she might ask for him back. And while I knew I would have to accept it if Jonathan wanted to live with his real mother, the thought of it made my heart ache. But Josephine never made that request. Adam had once claimed that his first marriage had ended due to his wife's spending habits, but Josephine's side of the story revealed that wasn't true. Instead, Adam had married her for money. She was an heiress from a wealthy family. After the wedding, when his lavish spending drew attention, he started lashing out at Josephine, saying things like, "What do you think I married you for?" He even resorted to violence. Eventually, Josephine became both physically and mentally unwell, and her family agreed to the divorce terms Adam demanded, just to sever ties with him. One of those terms was Jonathan's custody. And so Josephine had been unable to see her son since, although she continued to pay substantial child support every month. I'd never once heard anything about this large sum, though. Had Adam been trying to deceive me from the start, too? Josephine regretted parting with Jonathan, even though her poor health left her with no choice. She never imagined they would reunite under such circumstances. When she did finally see him, she hugged him lovingly, but she never once said, "Come live with me." Perhaps it was due to her family's wishes, but I sensed she held back mainly for Jonathan and me, knowing how many changes we'd already faced. Now, as a friend, Josephine genuinely cares for me and wants to support Jonathan, his biological mother, who meets with him occasionally. It's a unique setup, but Jonathan seems to be content with this family arrangement. Then, something else happened. 3 years after disappearing, Adam returned to our home, making no apologies for leaving or explaining why he vanished to begin with. Instead, he said something unthinkable. "I'm getting remarried, so I'll be taking Jonathan back." Apparently, his new partner's father is a CEO, and they need an heir. My fiancée can't have children due to her health, and I already have Jonathan. It works out perfectly, doesn't it? You'll finally be free from babysitting a kid that's not even yours, he said, treating Jonathan like some sort of object to be traded. I was beyond furious. You abandoned us both, and now want to assert your rights as a father at your convenience. There's no way I'll agree to this. Leave now. I think he was surprised at my reaction. I believe any mother would have been angry, but the man I once thought of as a family man was indeed just an illusion. Adam still didn't seem to feel any remorse, looking down at me as he continued, "This is for Jonathan's benefit too. With me, he'll get out of this tiny apartment and live in a huge mansion. He'll have all the games and toys he wants. His life will be set. A smart kid like Jonathan knows what's best, doesn't he?" Jonathan is now 10 years old. He's old enough to decide who he wants to live with, and as a parent, I should respect his decision. Honestly, I felt torn. For the past 3 years since Adam left, and even before that, I'd loved Jonathan dearly, like my own son, and wanted to be there to watch him grow. That's what I truly believe. That is only my desire. Jonathan is kind-hearted, and maybe he's just been holding back, dreaming of living with his biological parents. Perhaps he's been quietly wishing for things he's denied himself to spare my feelings. The more I thought about it, the less confident I felt. unable to believe that Jonathan would definitely choose me. After Adam left, Jonathan stared at the business card his dad had given him. I was too afraid to ask. What are you thinking? A failure as a mom, maybe. But Jonathan spoke first. Tomorrow, I'm going to Dad's. I see. All right. I managed to keep my voice steady, though it took everything in me. The next day, Jonathan left in Adam's car. I was worried but relieved to see him return a few hours later. I knew he wouldn't start living with Adam immediately, even if he decided to. But when I saw him come back, I was overwhelmed with relief. Then I noticed someone unexpected standing just behind him, and my tears dried up. This is the person Dad was going to remarry, Jonathan said. Wait, what? Hello, I'm sorry to arrive unannounced. My name is Scarlett. The young woman introduced herself. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with delicate, pale skin, and a frail, almost ethereal quality like someone who might vanish if you looked away. Adam had mentioned his fiancée was in poor health, and she did look fragile. I had no idea why she was here with Jonathan, but her gentle demeanor stopped me from questioning her right away. I invited her inside, but she politely declined. Thank you, but I'd prefer to speak here if you don't mind, she said, starting right at the doorway. And what she said next was beyond anything I'd imagined. I apologize deeply for asking to take your son. I didn't know the full story. Adam didn't tell me, and to my shame, I only discovered the truth today, thanks to Jonathan. I realize now that he had been lying to me this entire time, and I would have walked into this marriage deceived if it weren't for him. I'm very grateful, she said, bowing deeply in apology. She was apologizing for requesting to take Jonathan, and hinted that he had somehow helped her see the truth. But I was still lost as to what had actually happened. So Jonathan explained. Adam had taken him to Scarlett's family's mansion. Scarlett's parents, kind people, welcomed him with delicious food and drinks, showing their hospitality. As the meal was coming to an end, Scarlett's father, Ethan, spoke gently, but with a concerned tone. Well, Jonathan, I hear your current mom isn't your biological mother, and that you must feel out of place. I also heard she drinks all the time and doesn't come home, so you end up handling the household chores. That's far too much for a boy as young as you to bear. I know this might seem unfamiliar to you, but if you'd like, please think of this place as your home and enjoy yourself freely. We won't force you, of course. Jonathan appreciated Ethan's thoughtfulness, but he grew suspicious when he noticed some untruths mixed into the story. Sure enough, he saw Adam whispering anxiously. I specifically asked you not to mention that to Jonathan, but what matters most is how he feels, Ethan replied. At that moment, Jonathan gathered his courage and spoke up. I'm very happy with the life I have now. I truly feel lucky. So I can't become part of this family. I'm sorry. His words surprised everyone, leaving the room in silence. Concerned, Scarlett asked, Are you sure? You're not forcing yourself to say this? Jonathan then recounted everything he remembered. How Adam had been violent with Josephine. How he would lie about taking Jonathan on outings but instead left him at his parents' house while he went to meet another woman. And how I don't drink, never forced him to work, and certainly never hurt him. Jonathan shared that Adam was the one who behaved terribly, lying every chance he got, and that he trusted nothing Adam said anymore. Wait, that was during the time we were dating, wasn't it? He told me he was single after 2 divorces. Was I just another affair? Scarlett's shocked reaction made her parents realize they, too, had been deceived. What's going on here, Adam? Have you been lying to us about your status just to pursue a relationship with Scarlett? Adam tried to make excuses, saying, "No, you're mistaken. He's just a kid, don't take him seriously. This is all a misunderstanding." But Ethan dismissed his excuses. How could a child fabricate such vivid lies? In any case, I can confirm the timing of the disappearances from the records. If there's any falsehood, this engagement is certainly off. Realizing the facade was crumbling, Adam finally lost his composure. "You can't break up with me. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to make it this far? Enough from this brat." He lunged at Jonathan, but the security guards quickly restrained him, and he was later taken to the police. Scarlett apologized profusely before she left, and I felt a wave of relief knowing that I wouldn't have to hand Jonathan over to Adam. But I also worried about Jonathan. He'd been exposed to the harsh realities of adult deceit. While he had bravely shared his experiences, and even saved Scarlett from an unfortunate marriage, I couldn't help but wonder how this would affect him emotionally. I wanted to find the right words of comfort, but they didn't come immediately. I hugged Jonathan and whispered just one word, "Thank you." In response, he hugged me tightly and said, "I'll protect you, Mom." Afterward, Scarlett called off the engagement, and following her parents' advice, she planned to demand compensation from Adam. Josephine, too, decided to take legal action to get back the child support Adam had withheld after he disappeared, saying she wanted to use that money for Jonathan's benefit this time. As for me, I didn't plan to seek any compensation. All I wanted was for Adam to stay out of our lives. Unfortunately, he had other ideas. He returned, shouting, "Let's try again," and "Jonathan is my son," while banging on the door, kicking it, and rattling the doorknob violently. Of course, I called the police. We're also planning to take legal action to ensure he can't come near our family again. As Jonathan watched his dad being led away, I worried for a moment. After everything, he might still have some lingering feelings, seeing that Adam was his biological father. But then, as Adam was escorted away, Jonathan yelled, "Get out, you lying bastard." I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, he truly was a lying, awful bastard. For once, I didn't even want to scold Jonathan for his language. Instead, I joined him, shouting after Adam until he was completely out of sight. "Just leave us alone, you jerk." Maybe it was a bit inconsiderate for the neighbors, but just this once, it felt right. With every shout, it was as if we were releasing all the pain and sorrow from the past. We've been through so much, but that just means happiness is surely coming our way. Right, Jonathan?
I was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. Just 1 year left to live. Suddenly, my everyday life was engulfed in darkness, as if it had been stolen away. The first thing that crossed my mind was whether I should tell my husband Thomas and my son Stephen about this harsh reality. I hesitated for a bit, but ultimately decided not to tell them. I didn't want them to see me getting weaker, and more than anything, knowing how challenging caregiving can be, I didn't want to put them through that. So then, what should I do? The answer to that came quickly as well. I would ask for a divorce without saying anything. Rather, no other options even came to mind. And so, without telling them anything, I began packing up my belongings. Then one day, out of the blue, "Carol, come here for a sec. We need to talk." Thomas called out to me. While I had no definite proof as to why, deep down I was almost certain. Of all things, had he noticed my illness? Across the table in the middle of the living room sat Thomas, wearing a grave expression. Sensing that the moment had finally come, my heart pounded so hard it felt like it would leap out of my mouth. "I'm only going to say this once, so listen up," Thomas began. I swallowed hard. "I don't want to be a caregiver. I saw how much pain you were in. So, I want a divorce." His unexpected words made me feel like everything was going dark before my eyes. "I understand. Then, I'll be the one to leave. Thank you for everything up until now." Rushing past Thomas, who looked like he still had more to say, I left the living room. Without even grabbing the bags I had prepared in advance, I ran out of the house. Outside, rain was pouring down. "Hey Carol, what's for dinner tonight?" My husband Thomas poked his head out from the garden to ask me this question, having just finished up his new gardening hobby. It was 3 p.m. A bit early to be thinking about the dinner menu. But then again, this was typical for him. "I haven't decided on anything yet," I replied. "Is that so?" Thomas responded. Thomas had always been selfish since he was young. His infidelity was not just a 1 or 2 time thing, and I had to handle most of the housework and childcare by myself. To top it all off, he got hooked on gambling, constantly betting on horse races and all sorts of other things, winning and losing over and over again. While he never went into debt, there were times when we came close to that kind of situation. Just dealing with that alone was incredibly tough. But then, around the time when raising Steven started to settle down, my mother-in-law Linda had a stroke and became paralyzed on one side of her body. I was the only one taking care of Linda when she needed long-term care, but that burden was finally lifted when she passed away 2 years ago. As for Thomas, honestly, I'm not really sure what he was doing during that time. He went to work as usual, and whenever he had a little extra money, he probably went off somewhere to gamble. It's not like he never contributed any money at all. When he won at gambling, he would come home in high spirits and give me some money for cosmetics, a somewhat nice brand name watch, or living expenses. But the thing is, with gambling, you lose more often than you win. So there were times when it affected our household finances, and I would scold him when he came home after a big loss. Why do I put up with so much to be with him? Honestly, I don't know myself. After he reached retirement age, maybe he had a change of heart. He finally stopped cheating, and his gambling was reduced to just enjoying the occasional horse race. On the other hand, it was surprising that Thomas took an interest in gardening, but it's a far healthier and more wholesome hobby than gambling. Seeing that, I felt relieved deep down. And so, as we reached the second half of our lives, we were finally blessed with some peaceful days. Then one day, sometime after that, a loud yell suddenly rang out, shattering our tranquil daily life. "Oh, Carol! I hit it big!" The red ballpoint pen Thomas was holding clattered to the ground. "What? What happened?" His voice was so loud that I ended up yelling back. "I got a $1,000 payout on the trifecta." Apparently, he had hit a huge jackpot. Certainly, his biggest wins until now had been around $300. But this time, it was a high-stakes payout of $1,000. Thomas was overjoyed like a child. "I know, Carol. Let's go on a trip with this money." "Huh?" A few days later, as we were discussing it, he came home with a large sum of money in hand. It's not a very reassuring amount for retirement savings, but it's certainly not a small sum either. When was the last time we went on a trip, I wonder? "When should we go? And where do you want to go anyway?" Seeing him so uncharacteristically enthusiastic, I think back to how we used to be. It wasn't all good times, but they're still fond memories. When I really think about it, it's quite strange that I've stayed with Thomas this long. But even so, he's still undoubtedly my husband. There must be some kind of charm about him that I can't quite put into words. "Anywhere is fine. I don't have any particular plans anyway." "All right then, I'll decide for us." Saying that, he skillfully started operating his smartphone. I still haven't gotten used to it no matter how much time passes, and I can only use the bare minimum functions. But he has mastered it. Hey, how about we go overseas for a change? At our age, that's a bit much. I see. Then let's keep it domestic. It doesn't quite feel like him, but I don't have a bad feeling about it. The thought of being able to spend our time leisurely and peacefully like this from now on makes me a little happy. Since we have the opportunity, it might be good for us to talk about our future life together while on the trip. He's calmed down a bit too, so he probably won't suggest anything crazy. 1 week before the trip. While getting ready, I suddenly felt something off with my body. In that instant, an intense pain assaults me simultaneously from my abdomen and the opposite side of my back, as if being crushed. Almost at the same time, a black darkness rushes in from the edges of my vision. Before long, it filled into the center. When I open my eyes, I see the face of my son Stephen. Huh, Stephen? What are you doing here? What do you mean? What am I doing? Mom, you collapsed. According to him, I had apparently lost consciousness in the bedroom and was immediately carried to the hospital. Come to think of it, he had said he was coming home today. The thought of what might have happened if he hadn't been there is terrifying. It's noisy all around, with several nurses bustling about in addition to Stephen. It seems to be a grave situation of some kind. Is it my fault that things are in such a flurry? I ponder with my muddled mind. The answer is extremely hazy and doesn't come to me properly. Somehow managing to finish gathering my thoughts, a dull pain ran through my abdomen as if I had just remembered it. Unable to bear it, I press on my stomach. What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine. It just hurt a little. I try to put on a brave face so as not to worry Stephen, but pain is pain. If I do end up being diagnosed with something because of this, I want to keep it from Stephen. And of course, from Thomas too. I don't want to cause them any unnecessary worry because of me. I don't want to show them my weakening self either. Having them take care of me after how challenging it was is out of the question. With that single-minded determination, I somehow managed to stay conscious. After that, I underwent several examinations and was admitted to the hospital that day. I told him I was fine and sent him home to pack some things for me. I also left a message for Thomas, telling him to let him know it was just for testing and hospitalization. All I could do after that was pray that nothing was wrong. That night, a middle-aged male doctor in a white coat walked over to me and quietly sat down. Seeing his face, I instinctively sensed it was bad news. His expression was that gravely serious. Miss Smith, please listen calmly. That's the usual line, I thought to myself. My intuition turns into certainty. Okay. We found cancer. It's stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Removal of the cancer is impossible. This must be what they mean when they say everything went dark before their eyes. It must have gone dark like this right before I actually lost consciousness too, but it's completely different from this darkness now. The despair was on a whole other level. I see. Cancer. All the various noises that had been busily ringing until then were cut off, and I could barely make out the doctor's words. The reason for all the commotion seemed to lie with me after all. You have 1 year left to live. And then the crushing final blow, the pronouncement of my remaining lifespan. Amidst the silence of the surrounding sounds, the only thing I could hear clearly was the sound of something crumbling inside me. Collapsing like a tower of building blocks. 1 year. It wasn't much to begin with, but all our plans for retirement have been ruined. No, in fact, retirement itself has vanished. I can only imagine how you must feel. What exactly can he imagine, I wonder? Amidst the swirling questions and confusion, my unwarranted anger is directed at the doctor. You could be admitted to the hospital right away, but I'm sure you have various things to take care of. Let's suppress the progression with medication for a while. After that, we can consider treatment options. But for now, I understand. That's all I could say in response. Later, Thomas and Stephen came to visit me at slightly different times. Hey, Carol. You all right? I'm fine. I just fell and got a little injured. You're making too big a deal out of it. I said that, but Stephen's gaze, knowing that it was different from the truth, was painful. After returning home once, a sigh escapes in front of the suitcase that was in the middle of being packed. The first thing that comes to mind is whether I should tell them about this reality. I agonized over it a little, but in the end, I chose not to tell them. In that case, what should I do? The answer to this also came to me immediately. Ask for a divorce without saying anything. Rather, this was the only thing I could think of. Once I've made up my mind, the packing that was left half-finished won't go to waste. And so, I decided to start sorting out my belongings without telling the two of them anything. Since the trip was postponed, most of the luggage is still as it was. Thomas was disappointed at first, but considering the circumstances, he kept it from showing on his face. Then one day, as I was switching to packing to secretly leave and working on it, Thomas appeared in the bedroom. Carol, come here for a bit. We need to talk. A sudden summons. While I have no definite proof as to the reason, deep down I have something close to certainty. Of all things, has he noticed my illness? Across the table in the center of the living room sat Thomas with a grave expression. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would leap out of my mouth at any moment. I'm only going to say this once, clearly. I swallowed hard. I don't want to be a caregiver. I saw how much pain you were in. So, I want a divorce. His unexpected words made me feel like everything was going dark before my eyes. Could it be that he heard it from Stephen? Or, I don't know how, but he saw through my illness and brought up divorce with caregiving as the reason, and I couldn't hide my agitation. I knew he had always been selfish, but I never thought it would be to this extent. At the same time, I realized that the decision I had made was not a mistake. Yes, that had been my intention from the beginning. In a sense, I even felt a sense of refreshment. I understand. Then I'll be the one to leave. Thank you for everything up until now. Brushing past Thomas, who looked like he still had more to say, I left the living room and ran out of the house. Outside, rain was pouring down. I had boldly run out, but after calming down a bit and thinking about it, I have nowhere to go. I left behind even the suitcase I should have prepared, and all I have with me is a smartphone that I can barely use properly. I even left my wallet behind. To make matters worse, the rain that was light when I came out has now turned into a downpour. I watched it from under the wisteria vines in the park. Well, what should I do?